crying stranger stepped off the stagecoach, clutching a small wooden box, and the cowboy waiting for a wife suddenly realized she was running from something far bigger than distance. The stagecoach door slammed against the iron frame with a sharp clang. Dust swirled across Pine Ridge as a young woman stumbled onto the street, one hand gripping a worn suitcase, the other clutching a small wooden box so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could hide them. Around her, conversations faded. Boots stopped moving. Then a cowboy stepped forward, lifted her trunk, and quietly said something that made her freeze in place. But what she carried with her to Wyoming was a secret neither of them could escape. If stories of love, courage, and second chances speak to your heart, stay with us and share where you're watching from. The stagecoach rolled into Pine Ridge beneath a sky bleached white by the Wyoming sun. Dust drifted behind the wheels and settled across the main street, coating hitching posts, wagon tracks, and the boots of men waiting outside the general store. Before the coach had fully stopped, a woman stepped down too quickly. Her shoe caught the edge of the iron step. For a brief second, she nearly fell. A few people turned. The woman caught herself and straightened at once, but not before a small gasp escaped her lips. Then came the tears. She pressed a gloved hand against her face as though she had been holding herself together for hundreds of miles and had finally run out of strength. The town watched. Pine Ridge was not a place where strangers arrived every day, especially not women traveling alone, especially not women carrying their whole lives inside one worn trunk. Across the street, Wade Harper stood beside a stack of feed sacks outside Miller's Mercantile. He had come to town for lamp oil, coffee beans, and a shipment receipt he was expecting from Cheyenne. Instead, he found himself watching a stranger cry in the middle of the road. Most people noticed the tears. Wade noticed the trunk. The corners were worn smooth. The handle had been repaired twice. The woman held a small wooden box against her chest, as if it contained something precious or irreplaceable. The stagecoach driver climbed down beside her and stretched his back. "Long trip from Kansas City," he said. Nobody answered. The driver looked around and spotted Wade. "There you are, Harper. This is the lady who answered your advertisement." The silence that followed seemed louder than the rattling coach. The woman slowly lowered her hand. Her eyes were red. Not from weakness, from exhaustion. For a moment, Wade recognized the look. It was the look of someone who had nowhere left to go. He removed his hat. "Miss Brooks?" She nodded. "Evelyn Brooks." His voice remained calm. "Wade Harper." Another tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Embarrassment flashed across her face. She quickly turned away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't owe anybody an apology." The words surprised her enough that she looked at him. Around them, townsfolk had already begun pretending not to stare while continuing to stare. Wade reached for the trunk. "I reckon we'd better get moving before the whole town decides your business belongs to them." A few quiet chuckles drifted from nearby porches. Evelyn managed the smallest hint of a smile. It disappeared almost immediately. The wagon ride to Harper Creek Ranch was quiet at first. The road wound through rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush and weathered fences. The mountains stood blue in the distance. Evelyn sat stiffly beside him. The wooden box never left her lap. Finally, she spoke. "I should tell you something." Wade kept his eyes on the trail. "All right." She swallowed. "I'm not afraid of you." The words hung in the warm afternoon air. "That's good," he replied. She stared at the passing fields. "I'm afraid this is my last chance." The horses continued their steady pace. A hawk circled high above them. For several moments, Wade said nothing. Then he nodded once. "That sounds harder than being afraid of me." A faint laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It quickly turned into silence. After another mile, she spoke again. There was a scandal. Wade waited. She looked down at her hands. My engagement ended. The words seemed difficult to say. When it did, most of Kansas City decided they already knew whose fault it was. The wind lifted a loose strand of hair near her cheek. She looked away toward the distant mountains. I lost more than the engagement. Wade noticed her fingers tightening around the wooden box, but he didn't ask questions. Not yet. The ranch appeared on the horizon. A white house, a red barn, a long stretch of fencing catching the afternoon light. Evelyn stared at it. Not because it was impressive, because it was real, because it might become home. Or it might become one more place she would lose, and she still wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. The wagon rolled through the front gate just as the sun began slipping behind the western ridge. The gate gave its usual squeak. The horses slowed on their own, familiar with the path. A yellow porch lamp glowed beside the front door. Nothing about the ranch looked grand. That was what surprised Evelyn most. It looked lived in. The barn stood weathered but sturdy. A water trough sat beside the corral. A pair of work gloves rested on a fence post as though someone had forgotten them that morning and never bothered to move them. Wade carried her trunk onto the porch. He opened the front door and stepped aside. You first. The house smelled faintly of coffee, pine wood, and the smoke of old winters trapped inside the beams. Evelyn paused near the doorway. A rocking chair stood beside the fireplace. Books sat on a shelf. A pocket watch rested on the mantel. Nothing expensive, nothing meant to impress. Just a home. Wade led her down a short hallway and stopped at a small room overlooking the pasture. Fresh linens covered the bed. A pitcher of water sat beside a wash basin. Near the window stood a narrow writing desk. On top rested a key. Evelyn looked at it. What's this? Your room. She blinked. And the key? So you can lock the door if you want. The answer came so simply that it took her a moment to process it. He set her trunk beside the bed. There's a payroll ledger in the kitchen drawer. If you stay and work here, you'll be paid. Evelyn stared. You'd pay me? Wade looked almost confused by the question. Seems fair. No speech. No conditions. Just fairness. Something tightened unexpectedly in her throat. After Wade left, she sat on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet. No voices outside discussing her reputation. No neighbors watching through curtains. No church committee deciding whether she was respectable enough to remain employed. Only the distant sound of cattle and the wind moving across Wyoming grass. That night she barely slept. Not because she was uncomfortable, because peace felt unfamiliar. The next morning she found Wade already outside repairing a section of fence. His coffee sat forgotten on the porch railing. The mug had gone cold. By breakfast, Evelyn had already organized half the receipts stacked beside the kitchen stove. Feed invoices, supply orders, freight bills from Cheyenne. She noticed numbers that didn't match. A shipment of fencing wire listed twice. 3 missing payments from spring cattle sales. When Wade came inside, she pointed to the ledger. You've got bookkeeping problems. He removed his hat. That bad? Worse. For the first time, she saw the corner of his mouth move. Almost a smile. By the end of the week, the books balanced better than they had in years. Word traveled quickly through a ranch. Especially good news. One afternoon, the ranch foreman, Ben Turner, arrived with his 8-year-old daughter. Lucy carried a school reader missing its front cover. While the men discussed fence repairs, Evelyn noticed the girl staring at the book. You read much? Evelyn asked. Lucy shrugged. A little. The answer told Evelyn everything. A little usually meant not enough. By sunset, they were sitting on the porch steps, sounding out words together. The next day, Lucy returned. 2 days later, she brought another child, then another. Soon 3 children sat around Evelyn's table every afternoon while dust floated through beams of sunlight crossing the kitchen. The house began to sound different. Laughter appeared where silence used to live. Even Scout, the ranch dog, started sleeping beneath the table during lessons. One evening, Wade returned from checking cattle near the north pasture. He paused outside before entering. Inside, he heard children laughing. For a moment, he simply stood there, listening. The ranch hadn't sounded like that in years. After supper, the children left. The stars appeared one by one above the valley. Evelyn sat on the porch steps. Wade joined her. Neither spoke immediately. A coyote called somewhere in the distance. Evelyn noticed the loose porch board she'd stumbled over twice that week. The next morning, it had been repaired. No mention, no credit taken. Just fixed. A few days later, she found one of Wade's work shirts with a torn sleeve. That evening, she mended it beside the lamp. The shirt quietly returned to its peg by the door. Neither mentioned that either. The gestures seemed too small to discuss, yet somehow they mattered. As darkness settled around the ranch, Evelyn finally spoke. There was a man. Wade remained still. She looked toward the mountains. His name was Franklin Boone. The wind moved softly through the grass. He wanted to marry me. And? I said no. A long silence followed. Then she gave a small, humorless laugh. A month later, everyone seemed to know terrible things about me. Wade stared into the darkness. The porch boards creaked gently beneath his boots. Neither of them noticed the rider watching Harper Creek Ranch from a distant rise beyond the valley. The man remained there only a moment, before turning his horse and disappearing into the gathering night. Someone from Evelyn's past had found Pine Ridge, and he wasn't the only one who knew where she was now. Summer settled heavily over the valley. The grass turned gold beneath the Wyoming sun. Wagons came and went along the main road. Ranch hands hauled feed. Children chased each other outside the church after Sunday service. On the surface, nothing had changed. Yet Evelyn began noticing small things. Small things were often the first warning. A conversation would stop when she entered the general store. 2 women who had smiled at her the week before suddenly became interested in a shelf of canned peaches. At church, a man she had met twice looked away before she could nod hello. Nothing obvious, nothing anyone could point to, just enough to awaken old memories. One Thursday afternoon, she rode into town alone with a list tucked inside her pocket. Coffee, lamp oil, needles, a replacement ledger. The general store was busy. A freight wagon had arrived that morning, and ranchers crowded around the front counter discussing cattle prices. Evelyn gathered her supplies quietly. Then she heard her name, not spoken loudly, spoken carelessly, the way people speak when they assume someone cannot hear. That's her. From Kansas. I heard she fooled some rich fellow back east. Jeremiah Pike said she left town before folks could find out the truth. Evelyn froze. The sound of coins hitting the counter seemed suddenly distant. For a moment she was back in Kansas City. Back in rooms where conversations stopped when she entered. Back in streets where people crossed to the other side. Back in a life she had fought hard to leave behind. The old instinct returned. Leave. Keep walking. Pretend not to hear. She nearly did. Then something inside her refused. Slowly, she turned around. The 2 men near the stove looked startled. One shifted uncomfortably. The other suddenly found great interest in his coffee cup. Evelyn stepped closer. The store had gone quiet. Even Mr. Miller behind the counter stopped writing in his receipt book. "You've heard stories," she said. Nobody answered. Her voice remained calm, steady. "I suppose that's natural." The silence deepened. She folded her hands in front of her. "I was engaged once." Several heads lifted. "I ended that engagement." A woman near the fabric section looked up. The gentleman involved did not take it well. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. He had influence. He had money. And after I refused him, people began hearing things about me. The room remained still. The stories were easier to believe than the truth. Her eyes moved slowly around the store. If any of you wish to judge me, that's your right. She picked up her supplies. But at least judge me for something I've actually done. Then she walked to the counter, paid for her purchases, and left. No dramatic speech, no tears, no anger, just dignity. By the time she reached Harper Creek Ranch, the sky had begun turning orange. Wade was repairing a gate hinge near the barn. He looked up immediately. Something in her face told him enough. "Town?" he asked. She nodded. Wade set down his wrench. Neither spoke for a moment. The evening wind moved across the pasture. Finally, Evelyn sat on the fence rail. "They've started." Wade leaned against the gate. "Jeremiah Pike?" She looked at him. "You know?" "I know Jeremiah." The answer said enough. Evelyn stared across the valley. The cattle looked like dark dots beneath the setting sun. "I thought I left all of it behind." Wade remained quiet. She appreciated that. Too many people rushed to fill silence. Wade never did. After a while he spoke. "My wife died 8 years ago." The word surprised her. He rarely mentioned personal things. He stared toward the distant hills. Spring fever came through the valley. His jaw tightened slightly. "The doctor tried." Evelyn listened. "I spent a long time angry after that." The breeze lifted the brim of his hat. A long time convinced that caring about somebody was mostly a good way to lose them. The confession seemed heavier than the words themselves. For several moments, neither moved. Then Evelyn looked down at her hands. "I don't remember the last time someone believed me before asking for proof." Wade turned toward her. The fading sunlight caught his face. "I believe what I've seen." She met his eyes. For the first time, neither looked away. The moment lasted only seconds. But something changed. Not loudly. Quietly. The way seasons change. The way roots grow beneath the ground before anyone notices. Later that night, Evelyn sat beside her bedroom window. The ranch lay silent beneath moonlight. A lantern glowed near the barn. Wade was making one final round before bed. She watched his silhouette move through the darkness. Steady. Dependable. Safe. Then she noticed something else. A rider. Far beyond the north fence line. Barely visible against the moonlit ridge. Watching the ranch. Watching the house. Watching her. The figure remained motionless for several seconds, then turned away and disappeared into the night. By sunrise, the stranger would be closer. Much closer. The next morning arrived clear and bright. A thin layer of dew clung to the grass around Harper Creek Ranch. The cattle moved slowly through the pasture while the cook stove warmed the kitchen. Evelyn was pouring coffee when she heard hoofbeats. Not the familiar rhythm of Wade returning from the barn. Someone else. She stepped onto the porch. A rider approached through the front gate. His horse was well-bred, his coat expensive, his posture confident. The moment she saw his face, the coffee cup nearly slipped from her hand. Franklin Boone. For a second, the years disappeared. Kansas City. Whispers. Closed doors. Destroyed friendships. The life she had lost. Franklin removed his gloves carefully before dismounting. His smile looked exactly as she remembered. Polite. Controlled. Dangerous. Evelyn. Her stomach tightened. Before she could answer, Wade appeared from the barn carrying a coil of rope. He immediately noticed her expression. Then he noticed the visitor. Franklin turned toward him. You must be Wade Harper. I am. Franklin extended his hand. Wade looked at it briefly before shaking once. Nothing more. I've traveled a long way, Franklin said. I thought it only fair to introduce myself. No, Evelyn said quietly. Both men looked at her. You came here because you found me. Franklin's smile never changed. I came because I was concerned. The word sounded almost laughable. Concern. The man who had destroyed her reputation now spoke of concern. Wade stood beside her. Not touching. Close enough. Franklin noticed. Of course he did. Over the following days, Pine Ridge began changing. Again. Franklin rented a room above the hotel. He bought drinks for ranchers, shared stories, shook hands, made friends. Everywhere he went, he planted seeds. Small comments, small doubts. Nothing anyone could challenge directly. Yet somehow people began asking questions. At church, at the livestock yard, at the mercantile. Jeremiah Pike became his loudest supporter. I've known Franklin for years, Jeremiah told anyone listening. Fine businessman, honest man. Each time Evelyn heard those words, she felt something inside her sink. One afternoon, a cattle contract Wade had been negotiating for months suddenly disappeared. The buyer withdrew without explanation. 2 days later, a section of fence along the northern pasture was found open. Several head of cattle wandered miles before ranch hands recovered them. No proof connected either event to Franklin or Jeremiah. But nobody missed the timing. At supper one evening, Ben Turner cleared his throat awkwardly. The men are talking. Wade looked up from his plate. About what? Ben hesitated, then glanced toward Evelyn. The answer was obvious. Later that night, after everyone else had gone home, Evelyn sat alone on the porch. The valley lay dark beneath gathering clouds. Lightning flickered far beyond the mountains. She heard the screen door open. Wade stepped outside. For a while, neither spoke. The wind carried the smell of coming rain. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. You should let me leave. Wade didn't answer immediately. She stared into the darkness. It would solve most of this. The first drops of rain began falling. You'd get your contract back. Silence. The gossip would stop. Still silence. And Franklin would have what he came for. Wade finally looked at her. The porch lantern cast soft light across his face. You think that's why he's here? She swallowed. I think I brought trouble with me. The rain grew heavier. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Wade rested his forearms on the porch railing. Then he spoke. I don't care what Franklin Boone says. Evelyn looked away. You should. No. The word came quietly, firmly. She blinked hard. He ruined my life once. I know. He might ruin yours. Wade turned toward her fully. For the first time since she had arrived, there was real emotion in his voice. I'm not afraid of what people say about you. The rain drummed steadily on the roof. Lightning flashed beyond the hills. Wade held her gaze. I'm afraid you believe them. The words hit harder than any accusation ever could. Evelyn looked down. Suddenly unable to speak. For years, she had defended herself against everyone else. She had never considered how much of those lies she had carried inside. The storm broke fully over the valley. Rain swept across the ranch. Wind rattled the windows. They moved inside. The fire crackled in the stone hearth. Neither sat close. Neither needed to. The silence felt different now. Not empty, shared. Then came a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Wade frowned. Nobody visited during mountain storms. He opened the door. An older woman stood beneath a dripping umbrella. Her gray hair escaped from beneath her bonnet. Water ran from her coat sleeves. Evelyn Brooks? She asked. Evelyn stood slowly. The woman looked at her carefully. then reached into a leather satchel. "My name is Martha Ellis." She placed a bundle of yellowed letters on the table. "I worked as a secretary in Kansas City." Evelyn stared. The handwriting on the envelopes was unmistakable. Franklin Boone's. Martha's eyes settled on her. "I think these belong to the truth." Outside, thunder shook the valley. Inside, hope appeared for the first time in weeks, and neither Evelyn nor Wade could yet know how much those letters were about to change. The storm lingered until dawn. Rainwater dripped from the porch roof in steady rhythms. The valley smelled of wet earth and pine. Inside the ranch house, Martha Ellis sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside her. The letters lay between them. Some were written in Franklin Boone's hand. Others carried business seals and signatures. Martha adjusted her spectacles and looked at Evelyn. "I kept copies because I never trusted him." Evelyn carefully unfolded the first page. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from recognition. The words were all there. Threats disguised as promises, warnings disguised as concern. One letter described exactly what Franklin intended to do if she refused him. Another mentioned payments made to influence newspaper notices and community leaders. Wade read quietly. The room seemed smaller with every page. By noon, Ben Turner had ridden into town carrying copies. Within 2 days, several people who had once remained silent began speaking. A former clerk, a retired minister from Kansas City, a freight agent who remembered certain payments. The truth did not arrive all at once. It arrived piece by piece, like daylight slowly filling a room. Still, Franklin remained confident. The Harvest Festival arrived on a bright Saturday afternoon. Wagons lined the church grounds. Children ran between tables covered with pies, preserves, and baskets of late summer vegetables. A fiddler played beneath a cottonwood tree. Nearly everyone in Pine Ridge attended. Evelyn stood beside Wade near the edge of the square. People greeted them politely, more politely than before, yet uncertainty still lingered. Franklin Boone arrived shortly after noon. Jeremiah Pike walked beside him. Both men wore confident smiles. Franklin removed his hat and greeted people as though the town already belonged to him. When enough people had gathered, he stepped forward. "I believe certain misunderstandings should be cleared up." The crowd quieted. Evelyn felt Wade's presence beside her, steady, unmoving. Franklin began speaking. For a few minutes he sounded reasonable, almost convincing. Then Martha Ellis stepped forward. The interruption caught everyone by surprise. She carried a small leather case. Inside were the letters. One by one they were read aloud. The square grew silent. Franklin's smile disappeared. Jeremiah's face lost color. Witnesses spoke. Documents changed hands. Facts replaced rumors. No shouting followed. No dramatic chaos. Just truth. Plain and undeniable. By the end, nobody was looking at Evelyn the way they had months earlier. They were looking at Franklin. And for the first time, he had nowhere to hide. The silence that followed felt enormous. Franklin lowered his eyes. Jeremiah stepped away from him. Several townspeople exchanged uncomfortable glances. Then Mrs. Harper from the Mercantile spoke softly. "We were wrong." Others nodded. The words spread quietly through the crowd. Not forgiveness, not immediately, but acknowledgement. A beginning. Everyone expected Evelyn to say something. She could have. She had earned that right. Instead, she simply stood there, calm, dignified. The woman who had arrived in tears seemed very far away. Then Wade moved. He stepped away from the crowd, walked directly toward her. People parted without realizing they were doing it. He stopped in front of Evelyn. For a moment, neither spoke. The afternoon breeze moved through the trees. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Wade took her hand, not for show, not for the town. For her. I didn't bring you here because I needed a wife. His voice carried across the square. Every person heard it. I asked you to come because I thought I needed help running a ranch. A faint smile touched his face. I was wrong. Evelyn's eyes filled, not with tears of shame, something different, something lighter. Wade tightened his hold on her hand. I kept you here because I can't imagine this place without you. The crowd disappeared. The mountains disappeared. Everything disappeared except the man standing before her. Then Wade lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps rippled through the square. He barely noticed. Evelyn Brooks, he said quietly, would you stay with me? Not because of an agreement. Not because of a letter, because I love you. The silence lasted only a second. It felt much longer. Then she laughed softly through tears. The kind of laugh that comes after carrying a burden for too many years. Yes, Wade smiled. The crowd erupted. Applause rolled through the festival grounds. Children cheered. Even old ranchers grinned beneath weathered hats. That evening, after the celebration ended and the stars appeared over Wyoming, Evelyn sat on the porch at Harper Creek Ranch. A small wooden box rested in her lap. The same box she had carried from Kansas City. The one she had protected all the way to Pine Ridge. Inside was a letter from her mother. Unopened. For years she had been afraid to read it. Tonight felt different. She unfolded the paper. The handwriting was faded but familiar. She read quietly beneath the lantern light. Near the bottom, one line stopped her completely. You will know you are home when you no longer feel the need to prove you deserve to be loved. For a long moment she simply stared at the words. Then she looked out across the dark pasture. Wade sat beside her. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The wind moved gently through the grass. Somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote called into the night. For the first time since leaving Kansas City, Evelyn was not looking behind her. She was looking forward. And beside her sat the man who had chosen her before the whole world. At last, she was home. Maybe that's why this story stays with us long after the last light fades over the Wyoming hills. Because if we're honest, most of us have carried something we wished we could leave behind. A mistake. A heartbreak. A season of life that made us wonder whether we would ever truly belong anywhere again. Put yourself in Evelyn's place for a moment. Imagine stepping off that stagecoach with nothing but a worn suitcase, a painful past, and the fear that one more rejection might break whatever hope you had left. Then imagine finding someone who doesn't ask you to be perfect. Someone who sees the scars, hears the rumors, and still chooses to stand beside you. Maybe that's the quiet lesson hidden in this story. Healing doesn't always arrive with grand speeches or dramatic rescues. Sometimes it comes through a steady voice at the right moment, a hand that doesn't let go, a place where you no longer have to explain your worth. And sometimes love isn't about being saved. It's about finally being seen. I'd love to know your thoughts. Have you ever been given a second chance when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments. And if stories like Evelyn and Wade's remind you that kindness, courage, and hope still matter, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting beyond the next trail. Stories of love, loss, mystery, and healing beneath the wide western sky. Until then, take care of yourself. And keep believing that home can find you when you least expect it.